welcome you to a summer public program at the Carey Institute. We realize these have been a little less frequent than we have during the spring and winter months, but we're pleased to be able to continue our public programs throughout the year, and we're particularly pleased that you're here tonight, and we've got a good speaker to entertain you and impress you with his work on environment. Let me also say that our next public program is roughly 3 weeks from tonight, August 20, when Heidi Cullen, who you probably know from the Weather Channel, she's the scientist on the Weather Channel, will be here to talk about the futures of climate. But tonight we're here to hear Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware. Doug grew up doing what every teenage naturalist wants to do, which is to grow up and get a job collecting bugs. As a result, he's now the head of the Department of Entomology at the University of Delaware, where he teaches courses in insect taxonomy and behavior, and heads that important program down there. Doug has taken his studies of insects to a special area, a special passion, in realizing that much of what we plant in our gardens and yards in suburbs and Dutchess County and other places is often not native to this area. Exotic species, essentially, that we select because often some nursery says this will be particularly showy, it will bloom in dry conditions, no light, you know, you heard the regular sales pitch. As a result, the countryside is covered with a number of species, herbs and shrubs, and even young trees that really are not native here at all. And of course, when one brings in and plops down in nature a species that has no historical natural presence in the landscape, it will, at the very least, be unknown to the insect fauna that might normally have to go along with it, that might normally live on it, may even be repulsive to the native fauna of insects that might fly in and see that this has been planted there. And as a result, the ornamental and exotic plantings that surround so much of our habitation do not carry with them the complement, the natural community of insects in particular that might normally be found on. And of course, with the idea in ecology that everything is connected to everything else, if you don't have the insects, then you're not likely to have the same complement of birds and other things that feed on those insects under normal conditions. And so things begin to ramify up the trophic levels in a way in which we create an environment that is very different from a functioning natural ecosystem. Doug realized this and was alarmed by the effects that perhaps was having on natural communities, and put these together in his studies in a book, Bringing Nature Home, which he will tell us about tonight. And with the cooperation of Marriott Bookstore, after the lecture, he'll be available to sign copies that will be available out in our lobby. Scott Myers of Marriott Bookstore has been a wonderful cooperative partner on a number of our programs here. And so we have with us tonight a very special view and special guest of somebody that has looked at nature, not liked what he has seen in many of our lawns and gardens, and has distinct recommendations and a plan for us to do better in having functional natural ecosystems in our backyard. Doug Tallamy.
Well, thank you very much. That sums it up beautifully. Thanks for coming. All right, we may as well start. When we lower the lights. My wife drove me up today, and when she dropped me off, she said, you know, these are really nice people, so you have to do a good job. As opposed to the bad job. All right, so we'll do a good job tonight. I want to start by telling you a story of something that happened to me when I was in 3rd grade. We just moved into a new development called Oak Park. It was called Oak Park because oaks are what the bulldozers had knocked down in order to build the houses. And our house was the first house to be built on its circle, and then they built them from right to left, so the lot to the left of us was undeveloped for a full year after we moved in. And there was a little pond in that lot. And I used to go over there every day and see what was happening. And in the spring, this is what was happening. Toads came and started to sing. I can believe that was the first time I'd ever seen a singing toad. The singers invited bigger toads and gave them a hug. I remember that. They kept hugging them, by the way. And then, of course, eggs came. And that was exciting because I knew what was going to happen next. We were going to have all those polypods hatching out. I was going to get to watch metamorphosis. And that was kind of a life-changing event to see those little polypods shorten their tail, have the hind legs pop out and the front legs pop out. And I made it a goal to be there the day that those tiny little toads came out and started their terrestrial life. They really are tiny little toads. And it must have been Saturday because I really was there, hunched down next to the pond. And out they came, the 10s, the 20s, the 100s. It was a great moment. But right then, the bulldozer came and buried that whole pond. That was the end of the little toads. It was not the end of the big toads because they're not at the pond when little ones emerged. But in essence, it really was the end of the big toads because they had lost their breeding set. Lived there another 17 years, and I can tell you that was local extinction for that population of toads in that corner of Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. It was local extinction for the garter snakes that ate the toads, for everything that was attached to the food web associated with that little pond. And the problem, of course, is that has happened so many times since then, in so many places since then, that we literally are losing the plants and animals we share the planet with. I wish we shared the planet as well as these two birds are sharing a sycamore in our backyard. But we haven't for a couple of reasons. First of all, and what you're looking at here is a caterpillar. It's a camouflage looper. We haven't shared the planet because, first of all, we haven't thought we needed to. We thought that we could develop anything, anywhere we went, and there would be plenty of nature left someplace else. And the reason we thought that is because that really was the case in most of our history. What we haven't appreciated recently is the enormity of the human footprint. We are absolutely everywhere, and nature is not happy in most places now. Another thing is that most of us, we're often reluctant to admit this, but we don't really believe that we need nature, that we need functioning ecosystems. We think we can get everything we need from our own technology and our own smarts. So if we lose it, it'll be too bad, but we can still watch it on Channel 12 and out there. When you think about it, though, when we develop living spaces for ourselves that don't support life, it could be a clear signal that our own life support systems are in trouble or are going to be in trouble soon. Now, in most places in the U.S., they're not in trouble yet. They're not in measurable trouble yet. They're all headed in that direction. And that's good because it gives us a chance to do something about this before it happens. Not after it happens, but before it happens. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk about why we need biodiversity, why we need nature, why we need to change the way we landscape in order to keep it around, why animal diversity depends on native plants, not plants that evolved in China or Europe, but plants that evolved right here. And then finally, we'll talk about how to make our landscapes sustainable. And I used to have the word more there. I used to talk about how to make our landscapes more sustainable, but I thought about that, and I think sustainability is like being pregnant. You're either sustainable or you're not. And right now our landscapes are not sustainable. So how do we get them there? A lot to talk about, so let's get going. First, what is biodiversity? Simple answer is it's every species, the number of species that is on the planet. There are many types of biodiversity. There's genetic diversity, there's population diversity, there's ecosystem diversity, and these are all good things that help ecosystems to function better. But we'll simply count the number of species, and there's still a lot of them out there. We've got about 420,000 species of plants. Globally, over 4 million species of insects. There are far fewer species of vertebrates, but still a lot of them. About 31,000 species of fish, about 15,000 species of reptiles and amphibians. Fewer yet species of mammals, almost 5,500, and about a third of them are endangered right now. Like these little white tent bats from Costa Rica. And then we've got about 9,700 species of birds. And each one of these species has a particular role in its ecosystem. And if you have a healthy ecosystem, you have what we call redundancy, where you have several species doing the same job. The good thing about redundancy is that if one of the species disappears, other members members of that guild pick up the slack, and they will still perform that job, and therefore the ecosystem will continue to function. The problem comes when we simplify ecosystems to the point where there's only one or maybe two species doing a particular job. But if they disappear, then the job is not done, and you start to get ecosystem failure. So why do we need biodiversity? That's the main reason. It is biodiversity that runs our ecosystems. When you have a diverse ecosystem, it's more stable, it's more productive. If you have a diversity of players in the ecosystem, it can support more life, essentially. And a diverse ecosystem is also less susceptible to invasion by alien organisms. We certainly have enough of that going on these days. So diversity is a good thing. Just think of the plants and the animals around you as the rivets that hold your ecosystems together. And don't forget that it is ecosystems that sustain us. A lot of people today, particularly our young people, think it is the mall that sustains them. Everything they need is in the mall. And maybe they're right, everything they need is in the mall. But everything that is in the mall came from a healthy ecosystem. And that's the message we're conveying very poorly these days. Why do we need these ecosystems? Because it's ecosystems that provide the life-giving services that keep us and everything else around. We just call them ecosystem services, things that we take for granted every day, like the production of oxygen. Now, how many people woke up this morning and wondered whether you have enough oxygen this afternoon? You might start thinking about that. Of course, it's plants that make oxygen. We have so far removed more than half of the forests that used to be on this planet, with no current recognition that that's not a wise thing to do. So we want to keep some plants around. And biodiversity also cleans our water. It doesn't create water, but it cleans it with an estimated value of $16.9 trillion a year. It builds our topsoil and also prevents erosion with an estimated value of $5.76 trillion a year. So we can actually put value on these ecosystem services. It's biodiversity that prevents floods, that moderates weather systems in general, with an estimated value of $6.8 trillion a year. Of course, it's biodiversity that recycles our garbage and pollinates our crops, $1.17 trillion a year. That sequesters carbon dioxide. I haven't found any value for this yet, but it's important. Believe me, this is a garlic tree in the forest of Costa Rica. It's about 500 years old. It's called a garlic tree because its seeds smell like garlic, not because it makes garlic. But it's a big tree. It's holding lots of carbon. Of course, trees are built out of carbon. They pull that carbon out of the atmosphere, and they lock it up in their tissues, and they hold it in place out of harm's way until they die. And then the wood decays and slowly releases that carbon back into the atmosphere. So here, carbon has been locked up for 500 years. It will continue to be locked up until that tree dies. That is an important ecosystem service. The planet used to be covered with trees like that. And you'd think that we'd be planting trees like that as fast as possible to pull as much carbon out of the air as possible. Instead, we're still deforesting the planet at a rate of 50,000 acres a day. And we typically think of other countries as doing that. Oh, that's Indonesia, that's Brazil, but that's certainly not us. But here's actually the plan for the U.S. in the next 50 years. We are slated to develop another 75 million acres of forest land. Not farmland, but forest land that is now sequestering carbon dioxide. That's going to release 5.4 billion tons of additional carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is the same as putting 100 million new cars on the road. That's the plan. It hasn't happened yet. It doesn't have to happen. Then, of course, here's another ecosystem service that we haven't given much thought to. There's increasing evidence that we actually need to interact with nature, particularly as young people, for our own healthy mental development. And this message is coming mostly from Richard Louv, who wrote this book, Last Child in the Woods. He has a very simple message. He says, our kids are not out playing in nature. Instead, they're playing with electronics. And we all know that's true. And because they're not out, well, not because, but he also notices that our kids have elevated levels of ADHD, childhood obesity, childhood depression, and he wonders whether or not there's a connection between natural play in nature and these childhood maladies. So he's encouraging us to do some research. Okay, that's fine. Richard Louv also says that our kids are the future stewards of the planet. And we don't need to do any research to prove that that is true. And if they don't develop an emotional relationship with other living things on the planet. With the things they're supposed to be stewarding, they're going to be lousy stewards. So Richard says, let's get the kids out of the house, let them run out of the backyard, turn over the rock, and play with the salamander. And I couldn't agree more, except that today, in so many places, the kids can run out of the house and turn over the rock, if there is a rock, and there won't be any salamander out there. Because we have sterilized our neighborhoods. We've sterilized our living spaces to the point where nature is essentially gone. It's gone from the lives of our kids. It's gone from our lives in most situations. So, we can put it back if we understand where it comes from and how to manipulate it. So let's talk about where animal diversity comes from. Well, animal diversity comes from plants. The more plants you have, the more animals you have. And that's, of course, because of this miraculous relationship that you see right here between plants and carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. We call it photosynthesis. Plants are the only major group of organisms on the planet that allow us to eat sunlight. They capture the energy from the sun, combine it with carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground, produce that oxygen that we still need, and they're tying up the energy from the sun in the bonds, the carbon bonds of simple sugars and carbohydrates. And that is the basis of all of the food webs on the planet, except for a few very minor food webs at the bottom of the ocean that are fueled by sulfur. And believe me, they're not going to save the day. So here we have plants making all of the food. That's important. Plants also have physical structure, which means they're creating much of the housing that is out there. So you have plants making the food and the housing for the animals that are out there, which means we can look roughly at the amount of plants in a given space and determine what the carrying capacity of that space is. What is carrying capacity? That's simply an ecological term that estimates the amount of life that can be supported sustainably, meaning without degrading resources over time in a particular space. We can plot carrying capacity. You can see we have this many plants determining the level of carrying capacity. I like to liken carrying capacity to the principal in an ecological bank account. So remember when we used to have bank accounts? They used to generate interest. And we could live off that interest as long as we didn't dip into the principal. That's how it used to work. And the same thing here. Here we have plants generating ecological interest in the form of food and shelter, and animal populations can grow and cycle using that ecological interest forever as long as they don't dip into the principal and reduce the amount of plants there. If we do reduce the amount of plant life, lower the carrying capacity, there will be less food and shelter being produced, so less ecological interest. And the animal populations that used to be up here will crash down below the new carrying capacity. That is an eastern deciduous forest, exactly like what you would find around you here. Very high carrying capacity because it has so many plants making so much food and so much shelter compared to a suburban lawn, for obvious reasons. We've taken the plants away from our living spaces. Yes, that's green. Yes, that's a plant. But it's only a tiny fraction of the plant life that used to be in that space, which means it's generating only a tiny fraction of the ecological interest that used to be in that space, which means there's only a tiny fraction of the animal life in that space compared to what used to be there. The problem with this is that we think that's normal. We've all grown up with that. Our parents grew up with that. As a matter of fact, we have laws that tell us this is good stewardship of the land, and if you don't make your property look like this, you get fined. That means we need to talk about what we've done to the carrying capacity of the U.S. There's nothing special about the U.S. We've done this all over the world. But I really like this picture because it says it very well. This is from a book that Sanderson put out last year. And it's about the past history and actually predictions into the future of Manhattan Island. This is what Manhattan looked like 400 years ago, when it had very high carrying capacity and sustainably supported a population of 600 humans. This is what it looks like today, where its carrying capacity is essentially zero. Yes, there's Central Park, there's a few plants there, but there really are no resources being generated at that site. Yet, some 8 million people live in and around the metropolitan area. So how can you have 8 million people living in an area with carrying capacity of zero? You can do that because resources move around. So the people who live on Manhattan, and my brother is one of them, get their oxygen from all over the world. They get their food from all over the world. They get their water from the Catskills. They send their garbage to New Jersey. And it works for the people of Manhattan as long as there are healthy ecosystems someplace else generating those ecosystem services that keep these people alive. And that, of course, is true for every city on the planet. If we pave over those healthy ecosystems, I don't know what the plan is for these people. I hope somebody's thinking about it. This is a map of the primary forests that have never been logged, that were in North America, in the U.S., in 1620, when European settlers first came to the eastern shores. And this is a map of the primary forests that were left in 1920. Still a few here and there, a little bit more in the Pacific Northwest. And that, of course, is because after we came to the U.S., we were largely an agrarian society, and we needed to chop down those trees so we could grow our crops. Fortunately, we didn't do it all at once. We chopped them down from east to west. And as we moved from east to west, we had the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of people gave up farming and moved into cities. And that allowed much of the primary forest to grow back. Now there's secondary growth. So they're not quite as good as primary forests, not quite as many niches, but still good places to be. Unfortunately, we haven't stopped growing. We are still adding about 5,700 people to the U.S. every day. Those people need a place to live and something to eat, so we're still out there sprawling. And what we've done to that secondary forest that grew back is fragmented. And if you go up in a plane, this is what you see. You see little teeny habitat fragments in most places. And that's all that's left of that actually was 950 million acres of virgin forest that was originally there. So this is what we have left. The question is that enough to support the biodiversity that we need to create those ecosystem services that we humans need, just from our own selfish perspective? We've got about 129 million homes in the U.S. When you turn the lights on at night, that's what it looks like. I talk about the great suburban-urban matrix, and people wonder, well, where is that? There. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And connecting all these places, of course, are paved roads. We have 4 million miles of paved roads in the U.S. The U.S. is only about 2,500 miles wide, and we've got 4 million miles of roads. And if you calculate the paved surface area of those roadways, that's equal to 5 times the size of New Jersey that's paved over. And that, of course, is not a functioning ecosystem. That's not going to deliver those ecosystem services we're talking about. And then we've got this love affair with the lawn. Last figure I saw was 45.6 million acres of lawn. I think we're adding 600 square kilometers of lawn each year to the U.S. That's over 8 times. That's 8 times the size of New Jersey, dedicated to a single, very simple ecosystem here. So this is alive, but it's not going to preserve the biodiversity that we need to sustain us. We're talking. Somebody have a question? No? We're talking about human-dominated ecosystems from coast to coast. 41% of the U.S. is in some form of agriculture. It looks like this. I took this picture of Michigan. That's pretty much what Michigan looks like these days. Or it looks like this. That's in Oregon. Or it looks like this. If you drive across the country, which we just did first time for my wife and I this spring, after you leave the corn belt, you hit the cow belt. Everything is cattle all the way to the coast. So when you see those vast open spaces from the plain, there's cattle on all of them. And 54% of the U.S. is in this suburban-urban matrix I'm talking about. There are some habitat fragments embedded in that matrix. So again, the question is, are they big enough? We'll do the math. That means 5% of the U.S. is relatively pristine. But most of those areas are too high or too dry to support the biodiversity that we need to keep our ecosystems going. I see this ad, and I just think it's not a good idea. Somehow they think that's going to sell paint. We're talking about the mass conversion of the natural world into managed ecosystems that are the places we live, the places we work, and the places we farm. And I'm not here to say that we shouldn't have done that or that we have to stop doing that. We've already done it. What I'm here to say is that it doesn't have to look like that. This space was designed for the aesthetic value of the homeowner. It was designed for convenience. But it was not designed with the idea of sharing it with any other living thing. But it could be. It could be. There's absolutely no reason why we can't share much of that space with other living things. And that's what I want to talk about the rest of the evening. Before I do, though, I want to talk about what's happening to the other living things, at least in the U.S. We've got 200,000 species of plants and animals in the U.S., and folks at the state natural heritage centers all over the country have been busy for years measuring the conservation status of each one of those species. Huge job. And at the last time they published, they had measured 1/8 of all those 200,000 species. And out of the 1/8, they found 4,252 to be imperiled. What does imperiled mean? It means they're now so few in number that they're no longer performing their ecological roles in their ecosystems. You can still go out and find one, collect one here and there, but they're not numerous enough to be doing their jobs in their ecosystems. So they're functionally extinct. The problem, of course, I mean, that's a big number, but that's only 1/8 of all of the species being assessed. When they finish assessing all 200,000, if that same pattern holds, it'll be 33,000 species that are in peril. That's an extinction crisis that you don't hear much about. We just had, well, a while ago, we had a presidential election, talked about a lot of important things, but the extinction crisis wasn't one of them, as if it's not so important or as if it doesn't exist. Now, we know more about birds than any other group because there are more birders out there looking at birds. And one of the things birders do is a breeding bird survey, which they're just winding up for this year. They've been doing that since 1966. So all over the country, birders have been simply counting the number of breeding birds of each species that they find in quadrants. And this is the data for, these are the data for neotropical migrants along the Mississippi Flyway and along the Atlantic Flyway from 66 to 2005. You can see the Atlantic Flyway is doing, the Mississippi Flyway is doing much better than the Atlantic Flyway. But neither Flyway is headed in the right direction. We now know from these surveys that Kentucky warblers, for example, have lost 29% of their population. Woodthrush has lost almost 50% of its population since 1966. Cerulean warblers have lost 84% of their population. I could do this all night because 127 species of neotropical migrants are in steep decline. And it's one of the reasons that this was the headline in the environmental section of the New York Times last year in March. It says 1/3 of our bird species are endangered, according to a survey that was commissioned by President Bush. Recently he commissioned a big survey on birds, and it involved a lot of groups, so you can believe these numbers. Is that Laura Bush like birds? So the answer came out after he was out of office, but there it is. It doesn't look pretty. I actually saw it as good news. I saw it as good news because scientists know that this is going on, so we're not surprised to see these results. But now it's in the New York Times. Now it's starting to be conveyed to the public. And we know that nothing's going to happen to change the way we're going until the public gets excited about it. So this is a step in the right direction. So we're talking about biodiversity as an essential, non-renewable natural resource. It's essential because, believe me, we humans are not going to stick around very long without other living things to help us out on this planet. It's non-renewable because when those living things go extinct, they're not coming back. Not in any ecological time frame, anyway. And yet that's what we're doing. We're forcing them to extinction. It has not been our plan. We haven't gone out and say, well, let's make this go extinct today. As a matter of fact, we set aside parks and preserves, and one of the mandates of these parks and preserves is to keep other species around. That's not working, so we need to understand why. There's several reasons, but there's really one simple one that is enough to explain the patterns we see. And that is that when you take a large area and you shrink it down to a small little fragment of that area, you take large populations and you shrink them down to tiny populations. So they're still in that fragment. The problem is tiny populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why is that? Well, all populations fluctuate. Good times they go up, bad times they go down. And they can do that forever. But if you're a tiny population, and you're starting near zero, in good times you go up, you add a few more individuals, but in bad times you go down, and boom, you can hit zero. And then you blink out with that little habitat fragment. And if there's no other habitat fragment nearby, there's nothing to recolonize, and you have species disappearing from these habitat fragments at an alarming rate. How do we know this? There's more and more studies that have been ongoing for a number of years that support that contention. And this is one of them. This is Barra, Colorado Island from the center of the Panama Canal. If you've ever taken a cruise on the Panama Canal, you've sailed right by it. And it was created in 1914 when we built the canal. We dammed up a river called the Chagres River to form Gatun Lake. And as the waters rose, they surrounded what was a mountaintop and cut it off from the mainland forests of tropical Panama. You can see it's not separated by any great distance. It's less than a mile in any one direction. Yet it's isolated enough to keep the animals that were on that island. This is what it looks like from the area. You can't really see, but it's virgin forest. It has never been logged, and it's completely forested. The only development on BCI is a small Smithsonian research station. So it ought to be pretty good habitat. Well, of course, it was built or created in 1914, so it's been almost 100 years that it's been isolated. And when it was founded, 283 bird species bred on that island. So far, 65 of those species have disappeared. That's 23%. Again, a number of reasons they disappeared, but forcing those populations down into tiny, vulnerable ones because they are too small to withstand natural stochastic fluctuations is one of the main reasons that we're losing these species. How many more species are going to disappear before it reaches a new equilibrium number of species that will be stable? Nobody knows. But there's several more on the brink of global extinction there. So the process is ongoing, and it's been 100 years. What's interesting to me is that Barra, Colorado Island is 3,700 acres. It's a pretty big chunk of real estate, especially when you compare that to the average size of the forest fragments that we're leaving in this area. Actually, you're in great shape up here compared to us down in Delaware and southeast Pennsylvania. In Delaware, the average forest fragment is 10 acres. And 84% of our forest fragments are less than 49 acres, which is 75 times smaller than Barra, Colorado Island. So what do you think is happening to the biodiversity in our little teeny habitat fragments? There are several of the data sets that tell us the same thing. The bottom line is that the natural areas we have left are no longer large enough to sustain the nature that we need them to sustain. And sustainability, economists tend to measure that in 5-year intervals. You know, sustainable to an ecologist means essentially forever. 100 years, 5,000 years, it's got to stay there or it's gone. Okay, that is a lot of bad news, so I'm going to have a drink. The good news is that most of what I told you can be reversed, I believe. Not all of it. But I believe that we can turn this around by changing one thing, and that is the notion that we can't share our spaces. We can share our spaces. And if we start to, if we take that 54%, for example, of area that we got dedicated to cities and suburbs, that's a lot of area of the U.S. that if we share with other species, we can certainly help them out. So our challenge, I'm just going to talk tonight about suburbia because those are the properties that most of us own and can immediately start addressing. Our challenge is to raise the carrying capacity of our suburban lots. How do we do that? Well, what determines the carrying capacity? It's plants. So if we put more plants back into suburbia, we'll raise the carrying capacity, and if we put enough plants back into suburbia, we can make it a healthy, functioning ecosystem. Again, so is that all we have to do is just add plants? Well, not quite. Remember why we're adding the plants. We're adding the plants because they are the first trophophile. They are what is determining the amount of food that will be produced. Plants are the basis of every food web that's out there, and we're putting them back so we can make healthy food webs to support all the other life forms. And unfortunately, all plants are not equal in their ability to support food webs. And that's because all plants are not equal in their ability to support insects. How do we know that? We're actually measuring that. This is autumn olive, Biodiversity. It's a plant that evolved in China. It was brought over here as an ornamental. And by the way, in China, it's very good at supporting insects. But it was brought over to this alien environment. Shortly thereafter, it escaped as now a major invasive species in the east. As you move further west, Russian olive takes over. When I was in Charlotte, people told me that it's not Ely Agnes, it's Ugly Agnes. Well, ugly algae is really poor at supporting wildlife compared to the plants that it's displacing, like black cherry would be a typical one in an early successional habitat, because, again, it's really poor at supporting our local insects. We know this because of experiments that we've been doing, and a number of people have been doing this, but this is what's been going on at the University of Delaware recently. Looking at Lepidoptera larvae, these are the caterpillars of mosquito butterflies, and here we're looking at abundance. On the green bars represent native plants, and the blue bars represent non-native plants. These are generalist species and specialist species, but you can just look at these bars. We get a lot more caterpillars in general on the native plants than on the non-native plants. And if we look at the number of species of caterpillars, you get exactly the same pattern. So there's a lot more happening on the native plants. Why does that matter? Well, let's say you are a bird and you're trying to find caterpillars to feed your offspring. If you're in a habitat that has 5, 10, or 15 times fewer caterpillars because it's overrun with alien plants that don't support them, you're going to have to forage 5, 10, or 15 times harder to get the same amount of food for your babies. Can you do that? No, you can't, because you're already foraging all day long, as hard as you can. 156 trips a day, 1 trip every 5 minutes, while birds are feeding their young. If you ask this yellow-throated warbler to go out and do that 10 times harder, it simply can't be done. So the end result is we have 5, 10, or 15 times less bird biomass in areas where we've got an awful lot of non-native plants, reducing the amount of bird food. What about our ornamental spaces? What about those suburban lots that we're talking about, where we have ornamental plants that we put there? Well, this is a data set we generated from the literature. We went to Michael Durr's manual for woody landscape plants and looked up the number of genera that he suggests we landscape with that are from someplace else, so alien plants. He suggests we use 69 genera of alien plants. These are woody plants, by the way. And 101 genera of native plants for landscaping. Then we went to the literature and we looked at the number of caterpillar species that could be supported by those plant genera. And the reason, again, we're focusing on caterpillars is that the literature on their plant hosts is far better than for any other insect group. For an awful lot of insects, we have no idea what they eat, particularly as larvae. And this is what we found. On average, about 4 caterpillar species can be supported by alien plants, compared to about 72 on average can be supported by native ornamental plants. So that's a tremendous loss of insect diversity, biodiversity, when we landscape with non-native plants. Why can't insects eat plants from someplace else? A lot of people think that insects can eat anything, and if you see them eating anything, you better kill them right away. But that's actually an urban legend. Insects are actually really fussy about what they can eat because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. Plants want to take that energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So what do? They protect their tissues with nasty compounds, secondary metabolic compounds that typically are bitter tasting or downright toxic. So every plant out there is protected by some form of nasty chemical. If you don't believe me, when you're walking to your car, grab a leaf and eat it. See if it tastes good. It doesn't taste good. And it does succeed. It's a very effective defense. It keeps most insect herbivores from eating most plants all over the planet. Yet we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do this? How do they get around these chemical defenses? Well, they do it by specializing. They become physiological specialists on a particular type of chemical defense. They can't deal with all of them, so they pick one. And they develop the enzymes that are good at detoxifying or storing or excreting those particular nasty compounds. They develop behaviors that allow them to circumvent it. And all of this takes a long period of evolutionary interaction with a particular plant lineage that is carrying the particular chemical that they're focusing on. That's what we call specialization. And the monarch butterflies is a perfect example of this. They, of course, are specialists on milkweeds. The genus Asclepias. What they really have specialized on is cardiac glycosides. It's a compound that is in milkweeds, one of the compounds, and it's toxic. So when you're walking outside, don't grab a milkweed and eat it because it'll give you a heart attack. Eat enough. But the monarch can eat the milkweed without any problem because it's got the enzymes get around those defenses. It's a great thing for the monarch and for specialists like this because it allows them access to nutrients that most other insects or animals are unable to handle. That's the advantage of specializing. The downside of specializing is that now that's all they can eat. So in focusing on one particular compound, which is in one particular lineage of plant, they've given up the ability to eat any other type of plant. So if we go along the roadside and we mow down the milkweeds, the monarch cannot curl up and start to eat asters or violets or grasses or anything else. They have become locked in to what they've specialized on. This is the double-toothed prominent. It's a caterpillar that only eats elms. So not only is it good at detoxifying the defenses in elms, it's also good at looking like the edge of an elm leaf. Why is that? Well, there's all these birds out there flying around trying to eat caterpillars. And you might think that birds hunt caterpillars, but they don't. They hunt caterpillar damage. They're looking for holes in leaves that caterpillars made. And when they find a hole, then they look all around the hole and try to find a caterpillar that made it. So you see this guy's getting here. He's sitting in the area that he's just eaten and saying, there's no holes here. The bird flies on and he's happy. It's a great relationship for the double-toothed prominent as long as there's elm around. But if the Dutch elm disease comes and wipes out our elm trees, the double-toothed prominent disappears because that's all it can eat. It's not just Lepidoptera that are specialists. This is the elderberry beetle, only eats elderberry. Dogbane beetle, only eats dogbane. This is a leaf-footed bug that only eats ash. So if the emerald ash borer comes and really does eliminate our ashes, this guy's going to disappear. And unfortunately, 90% of the insect herbivores that are out there are specialists, just like these species I've shown you. So if we come in with our bulldozers and replace the native plant communities that support these insects with non-native plants, those species are going to disappear. Well, who cares? Typically, gardeners do not care. As a matter of fact, they're very happy when the insects disappear. And that has been one of our major gardening goals is to create landscapes that are insect-free. Every time we go to the nursery, we buy plants labeled pest-free. If we see an insect, we spray it. And we've been wildly successful. We've created tens of thousands of square miles of suburbia that have very few insects in them. So it's not only gardeners that care very much. But who cares, of course, are all those things that eat insects. And it turns out it's an awful lot of things. All spiders eat insects, or they eat other spiders that eat insects. Other insects eat insects. Frogs eat insects. Toads eat insects. All of the amphibians eat insects. Lizards eat insects. Bats eat insects. Rodents eat insects. You might think rodents eat seeds, and they do, of course, when they can't get very many insects. But rodents are eating insects, and these other things are eating insects because insect protein is extremely high value. There are some studies that show that pound for pound, there's twice as much protein in insect meat as there is in beef. And insects also have fat bodies in their abdomens that are really high in energy. So an insect meal is definitely a plus for these little guys that want to grow quickly and reproduce quickly before something eats them. And it's the same reason that larger organisms are eating insects. A skunk is digging up your lawn to get the grubs in your lawn. Possums eat a lot of insects. Even things we don't think of as insectivores eat a lot of insects, like foxes, like black bears. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. What is that? Sharp-shinned hawk. It's a sharp-shinned hawk. Does it eat insects? No. Actually, they do take some grasshoppers in the fall. But it's a bird predator. It's a specialist on other birds. So you might think, there's something that we can still have if we take all the insects out of our environment. But in fact, that's not true because it eats other birds, and those other birds wouldn't be around if there weren't insects. So even though it's not eating the insects directly, it is indirectly tied to the quality of the insect populations in its neighborhood. Same thing with the garter snake. It's not eating insects generally in its diet. It's eating the frogs and toads that ate the insects. So it still depends on them. And this, of course, is the group of organisms that eat insects as much as anything that's our baby birds. And I say that because this is a list of the terrestrial bird families in North America that rear their young on insects. And it turns out to be 96% of them. So I can generalize and say that this brown thrasher and every other bird out there is not going to be successful in rearing its offspring through to maturity if it's in a habitat without enough insects. And that is such a habitat. Now, I've implied that we're spending a lot of time landscaping with non-native plants. And up till now, I haven't had any data to support that. We're actually measuring that this summer, and here are the results so far. What we've done is choose neighborhoods, and this is Delaware, by the way, here. So these blue dots are neighborhoods that we have chosen that were built. This is part of sprawl. They were built between 1990 and 2005. We've chosen them in different counties which control landscaping and different landscapers. And we've tried to randomize this as much as possible. And what we have so far with 57 houses measured so far, we looked at the amount of area in the landscape that could be landscaped. So we're not looking at the house footprint or the driveway or anything, but the area that could be landscaped, so far we found 92% is lawn. Out of the species of plants that are there, 75% are alien. And out of the plants themselves, just the number of plants there, 80% are non-native plants. So what we have here is a barren landscape that the plants that are in that landscape are from someplace else. So it's what we predicted, but it's actually quite a bit worse than we predicted. This is my neighbor's house. My neighbor is a good example of what we've been measuring, except that his landscape is 100% non-native plants. What you can't see is that he owns 10 acres, and every single plant he's put on this property is non-native. But my neighbor, I think, is a really good example of how most people relate to their properties. Because he, in fact, doesn't know anything about plants. He doesn't care about plants, and he didn't plant any of these plants. He hired a landscaper and said, do it, and this is what he got. He got a whole row of Euonymus elatus, which is a burning bush, of course, highly invasive. He's got 34 Bradford pears, even more invasive on his property. And everything else is from someplace else. Yet, my neighbor's perfectly happy. Should we be upset with the landscaper that gave my neighbor an all-alien landscape? Well, let's cut the landscaper a break for a while here, because let's face it, that's what he was trained to do, he or she. The horticulture industry has told us that the only plants we can landscape with are non-native plants. Why is that? Because horticulturists are artists, and their job is to paint the landscape with plants. And if they use plants from all over the world, they have a much bigger palette to work with. So they reduce the way we look at plants to one single feature, and that is what plants look like. What plants do doesn't seem to be important anymore. This is a picture that I borrowed from a horticulture magazine that tells me what my backyard should look like. If you think of landscaping for a sense of place, the sense of place here is Beijing, because every single plant there, except for the lawn, which is from Europe, is from Asia. So we've abandoned sense of place. And I remember I mentioned driving across the country this June. As I was going across the country, we pulled into a couple of neighborhoods in various spots and took pictures of the landscape. We drove through 15 biomes. And you might think you'd be able to recognize where you were if people were celebrating the sense of place. So I want you to guess where these places are from. This is Portland, Oregon. This is Bozeman, Montana. That's Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is Belvedere, Illinois. And I just was visiting my daughter in Hawaii. I took a picture there. I could stick that in there too, and you wouldn't know the difference. So what we've done is destroy the sense of trying to celebrate where you are by adopting this one single savanna-like landscape, which is essentially barren. How many native plants do you need in your yard, and how many alien plants are you allowed to have in your yard? I get asked this all the time, so I decided to put this slide in. And my answer is that depends on what your goal is. So let's say you're an arboretum. You know, an arboretum is a plant museum. Its job, its goal is to show people plant cultures from all over the world. They have to have plant cultures from all over the world to accomplish that goal. If you're a very highly skilled gardener and you want to create a special collection of Japanese conifers, for example, you've got to have Japanese conifers to accomplish that goal. But if you're supposing your goal is to restore a food web or to conserve biodiversity or conservation in general, you've got to use the plants that are good at doing that. So the percentage of alien plants or native plants in your property depends on what your specific goal is. What's interesting to me is that if I were to survey all the homeowners out there, most of them would say, what do you mean goal? I don't have any goals for my property. I didn't know properties had goals. I didn't know landscapes had functions. The goal that everybody has is to fit in with the neighbors. That's the single goal. So if we can provide landscapes that are primarily native plants, that are still aesthetically pleasing enough to fit in with the neighbors, then we could achieve a whole lot more conservation than we're doing right now. If most people truly are like my neighbor, we can change the plants on their landscape, and they never know the difference. They don't know a native plant from a non-native plant. It would still look nice. We can do guerrilla conservation here. if you're a landscaper. So. There are, of course, a lot of downsides to landscaping with non-native plants that we're all recognizing these days. And one of the biggest ones is that many of these plants have not stayed where we planted them. This, in fact, is a picture of one of those preserves I was talking about. This is called Fairhill Preserve in Fairhill, Maryland. It's a pretty good-sized preserve. But in the spring, and I drive by it on the way to work every day. In the spring, there's a period of a week or a week and a half, most years, where the plants from Asia leaf out before the plants from North America. And it's a great time to look out over your landscape and figure out what your alien load is. And that's what you're looking at right now. Every bit of green you see is a non-native plant in this preserve. And all the major players here, we've got multiflora rose, we've got privet, we've got Amur honeysuckle, we've got Japanese honeysuckle, we've got Japanese knotweed, we've got Oriental bittersweet, we've got ugly Agnes. They're all here, and they're all escapees from our garden. So this is a preserve. We wonder why they're not doing a good job at supporting our biodiversity. This is Cape May, New Jersey, major stopover for migrating birds. Extremely important place for migrating birds to stop and get a good meal before they continue on south. These are sweet gum trees. They don't look like sweet gum trees because they're covered with porcelain berry, another escapee from our garden. So now the birds have to get their meals from porcelain berry. If you pull the porcelain berry off these sweet gum trees, you find those trees are dead. They're just sticks at this point. And porcelain berry is just one of the many invasives that is now covering Cape May, New Jersey. 85% of the woody plants that are invasive in our landscapes today across the U.S. have come from the ornamental industry. So this is, I mean, if we're looking for pathways of where these plants are coming from, I think we've discovered a big one. This is just some of the alien plants, or the invasive plants that came from the ornamental industry. It's not an exhaustive list by any chance. I just stopped because I ran out of room. But Japanese honeysuckle is a big one. A lot of people say, I didn't know that it was ever in the ornamental industry. It was. It was sold for 80 years before it escaped. For 80 years, a nurseryman could legitimately say, this plant is not an invasive species. What they really say is, this plant is not a problem, but that ignores the food web issues. But it wasn't invasive for 80 years, and then all of a sudden it was. And that's what I want to demonstrate here. Every single one of these guys came in and behaved themselves in our gardens for a while, and then all of a sudden they didn't. They went through a latency period, and now they're in invasive mode. So many of the plants, I'm not saying all ornamentals are going to be invasive. The problem is we can't predict which ones will be, because they go through long periods, sometimes decades, where they behave themselves, and then all of a sudden they become invasive. So if we're trying to restore a suburban area like this, it's not just the amount of plants we need to think about. I mean, we certainly need to think about the amount of plants here, but we also need to think about which plants we're putting back into this landscape. So you might think, well, the simple answer is to plant all natives and we've solved the problem. But nothing is simple. We are finding out, as this list demonstrates. This is another list that we generated at the University of Delaware. And what it does is take all of the woody plant genera that occur in the mid-Atlantic states and rank them in terms of their ability to support caterpillars, Lepidoptera. So rank them in terms of their ability to support, to create food web. And the little numbers after each plant genus here are the number of species of bird food that they can make according to the literature. So memorize that. And then we can use that information to compare any two plant genera in terms of its ability to support wildlife. So let's do that. Let's compare tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera. Really important plant, a really common plant in our little forest fragments down in southeast Pennsylvania. We have a number of forest fragments that are monoculture, tulip monocultures. Let's compare its wildlife value, and it's a good native plant, of course, with one of the oaks. When we go back to our list and we look, Quercus is number 1. Oaks are number 1. They support 534 species of Lepidoptera. Compared to tulip trees, Liriodendron supports 21. Huge difference in the number of species of Lepidoptera supported. Yet they're both native plants. They both belong in our parks. I don't want to promote a monoculture of anything here, but if you had the space for a single plant in your yard and you wanted to help biodiversity the most, would you choose a tulip tree or would you choose an oak based on the number of species it supports? If you're drawing the carrying capacity of an oak forest, it would be way up here compared to a tulip forest, which would be way down there. What about redbud? This is a popular native ornamental. It's popular because it's as pretty as anything that Asia can throw at us. How does it compare in its wildlife value to black cherry, which is not in the trade at all? It's not in the trade at all because landscapers don't like black cherry. They don't like it because they say it's messy, meaning it makes more black cherries. And it gets 10 caterpillars, meaning it supports biodiversity. So they'll come on your property and cut them out, whether you tell them to or not. Well, black cherry is in the genus Prunus, and it's number 2 on our list. 456 species of caterpillars, just in the mid-Atlantic states, compared to redbud that only supports 19. Again, they both belong there under the right circumstances, but they're not equal in their wildlife value, even though they're both native. If you fight off your landscaper and you keep some black cherries on your property, you can have insects that look like this. I realize everybody does not like insects, but it's very difficult to tell me that that's not a beautiful creation. That is a cecropian moth, of course, and those are its larvae, equally beautiful, and they're most common on black cherry. The tiger swallowtail. Now we're all out there making butterfly gardens. So what do? We put in nectar plants that attracts butterflies. We hope they come from someplace else. But who's making the butterflies? Butterflies, of course, start with a plant. And the primary host plant for tiger swallowtail is black cherry. That's what the larva looks like. So when you're making your butterfly garden, put in the larval host plants as well as the nectar plants. And then you can generate butterflies as well as attract them. If you have black cherry in your yard, you can have the idle moth and its beautiful larvae. You can have the coral hair streak, the paddle caterpillar. You can have the red spotted purple. It's a specialist on black cherry, and its larva that looks like bird dung. You can have the promethean moth and its larvae. You can have the purple crested slug, the crocus geometer, the spotted apatales, the saddleback caterpillar. You can have the white furcula. You can have the stinging rose slug, the yellow-haired dagger moth, nascent slug, and 400 some odd other species of caterpillars if you keep those black cherries in your yard. What about an oak? You could have a puss caterpillar. You could have a polyphemus moth. You could have a buck moth, white-marked tussock moth, saddle prominent, double-line prominent, white-spotted prominent. You could have a lace cap caterpillar, a banded tussock moth, a smaller parasa. You could have a unicorn caterpillar, or a crown slug, or a hag moth. Thinks it's a tarantula. You could have a street dagger moth. You could have the red hooked bookworm. You could have the confused wood green. They have great names. Or you could have the spun glass slug. I think that's the coolest caterpillar you're ever. You know where I took all of these pictures? Our yard. Not our backyard. Because our front yard can function as a conservation area as well. So our yard in general, yes, I took them all there, and 10 years ago, that's what it looked like. It was a property that was mowed for hay, and there was nothing there. That's what it looks like today. So, these are not giant trees, but they're already there, large enough to support that's just some of the biodiversity that we have at our house. Just to emphasize that all native plants are not created equal, and you can really stack the deck in favor of biodiversity in your house if you pick particular genera. Let's look at this. If you start with an oak, you have the potential of getting 534 species. If you add a willow, that can jump to 811 species. And remember, we're just talking about caterpillars here. There's lots of other insects out there too that are eating plants. If you add a cherry, up to 961. Add a pine, over 1,000. Add a birch, over 1,100. A maple, over 1,200. A hickory, poplar, viburnum, elm, locust, blueberry, crabapple. You get 1,527 species of bird food with just 13 genera of native plants. You know how many genera of native plants are in the Mid-Atlantic states? 1,385. So you get more than half of the total number of Lepidoptera, which is the top 13 out of 1,385. So there's some really hot members out there that we should consider landscaping that. Now, a lot of people do not want to turn their yards into caterpillar factories. Yet those same people will put out bird seed all winter long to try to feed the birds. So we don't talk about caterpillar factories. We talk about planting to make bird food, and then all of a sudden it sounds okay. And the same people that put out the bird seed landscape in a way that starves the birds during the wintertime when they're trying to reproduce. So we can improve that by putting plants that generate those insects that these birds need when they're reproducing. In order to do that, we need to understand what is native and what is not. And we can do that best if we throw out this word, native. And think about what we're doing again. We are trying to recreate food webs that used to be in our area. Okay, which plants are going to be best at doing that? This is the Colorado blue spruce. That gives you a hint about where it evolved. It evolved in the Colorado Rockies. It's part of the Colorado Rocky food webs. It grows just fine in the east here. And a lot of people plant it in the east. But it's not part of eastern evolutionary history. It's not part of the eastern food webs. So the insects and plants around here don't recognize this guy, even though it's from North America. So you're not creating a native plant museum where you take one from Florida and one from Kansas and one from Oregon and you put it in your yard and say, I've got a native garden. That would be a museum, but it would not be a functioning food web. You need the plants that are part of your local food web. So just say a plant is alien if it has not had an evolutionary history in your area. If it's not part of the food web, that is part of your particular area. If you have to look up on a hardiness zone map whether or not it's going to make it in your area, that's a good hint that you're not working with one that evolved there. All right, what does a biodiversity-friendly suburb look like? There's no one answer to this, but everybody these days agrees that the most important thing we can do is to build biological corridors that connect the habitat fragments that are still intact, that we talked about at the beginning of the talk. We've got to build those biological corridors out of the plants that support the food webs, that support the animals we're trying to save inside those habitat fragments. Where are we going to put those fragments? Well, I suggest we put them in the area that's now in lawn. Lawn is not a very productive thing to do with the land. As a matter of fact, it's the second least productive thing you can do. Only paving is worse. So let's take some of the area out of lawn and put in the plants that will connect those tiny habitat fragments. If we connect them, they're not tiny anymore. They're not isolated anymore. Those populations are not going to be tiny and then fluctuate to extinction. They'll all be connected, and it'll be probably the single best thing we can do to preserve the biodiversity of the U.S. We can do this quickly if we were to stand our landscaping paradigm on its head. What we do today is we build our houses, we carve out areas where we're going to put our flower beds, and plant a tree here, here, and there, and then everything else by default becomes lawn. So it's all the areas we don't know what to do with become lawn. Let's reverse that. Let's build our house, carve out the areas where we're going to put lawn. So maybe we have some kids, they're going to throw the frisbee in the backyard, you need an area for that, or you want to have your party here, you want to be able to walk back here, so you've got a grass path. You want a clear area for people to see your pretty front steps. Whatever works for you, carve out those areas, and then everything else, by default, becomes heavily planted in some type of restoration design. And of course, this, we need these plants to be largely native so that they support the biodiversity we're talking about. This is it's a huge landscaping opportunity. I've had nurserymen sit in the audience and say, you're trying to kill our industry. No. There's 129 million homes in the U.S. that need to be redone like that. That's a business outlet I've ever seen. But if we were to do that in half the area that's now lawn, if we put biological corridors in half the area we now have in lawn, and let's make it simple. Let's say we've got 40 million acres in lawn, even though it's more than that. We could create a new national park, it would be 20 million acres in size. And we'll call it Suburban National Park. It would be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus the Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, plus the Badlands, plus the Olympus National Park, plus Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. If you add up all of these preserved areas right now, they're still not quite 20 million acres. So our Suburban National Park is going to be huge. Let's take areas that look like this and turn them into areas that look like this. This is one of the Larry Leader designs. This is a friend of mine's backyard. This is what we call the Lepidoptera Trail at the University of Delaware. What's interesting to me about this is, first of all, we're calling it a Lepidoptera Trail instead of a butterfly garden because it supports lots of species of Lepidoptera and many other things. If you call it a moth trail, nobody seems to care. But this area is about the size of a typical backyard. And a year ago, it was long. So it doesn't take 50 years to create a thing like that. And there's also the impression that we cannot landscape with native plants and have it be pretty. I think that's pretty. Or you go whole hog. You can make a woodland path in your backyard. This could be the edge of your property. And no more mowing the lawn. Your neighbor would never know it would work out. You might think this would take 1,000 years to get it there. It doesn't. Plants grow really fast. If you convince your neighbors to do it, where they're all doing this, then you've got that connectivity throughout suburbia. It'd be particularly valuable and work particularly well along any type of stream or river corridor, where you get many other benefits from planting heavily. There's some things that we need to think about when we're building our biological corridors, and this is one of them. Now here's a neighbor who has put the house in without cutting down all the trees. So that's a step forward. You'll notice that these are all tulip trees. There's a tulip tree monoculture for you. So we can improve that. But then the neighbor has gone along and did what we do everywhere, and that is mow under every single thing we plant. We have such a fascination with short grass that evolutionary psychologists have actually stopped to think about it. What is it about short grass? I mean, everywhere we go on the planet, we make these savanna-like landscapes. And they've got a couple of hypotheses. The one they like the best is that we spent a long time in Africa, and every time we went into tall grass or bushy scrub, we didn't come out again. So only people that didn't go into tall grass and stay in short grass pass down their genes, and that's why we feel safer in short grass. Okay, that might be true, but not in our biological corridors. We need the whole part of the habitat. We need the canopy, the subcanopy, the understory, the shrub layer, and the healthy forest floor, because there are species that are associated with each parts of those areas. We can put the tallest trees in the middle, densely underplanted by understory trees like shadbush or dogwood, densely underplanted with shrubs like blueberries, great dogwoods, many other things. We can be creative in the sunny areas on the edge of our habitat corridors with our perennial and annual gardening. You can pick particular plants that are really good at attracting, or I like to say, turning on the type of nature that you enjoy. And this is just an example. This is alternate leaf dogwood. I've gotten into, in getting into all this stuff, I've gotten really interested in photographing birds, probably because it's impossible. So it's a challenge, and what do good photographers do? We cheat. And this is one of the best ways to cheat is to plant the plant that they like right next to the house so they can be real close. So this is alternate leaf dogwood. It has a great bloom in the spring, produces lots of nice insects when the birds are reproducing. Then this turned into berries. It's got tremendous berry production. Well, it's pretty much over now, end of July. And of course, those berries are very attractive to many of the birds that are breeding in your area. Now, I put this particular plant right next to my bathroom window, unknowingly, really. It grew up and is now past my bathroom window, so when I go into the bathroom, I can see what's happening on that tree. And I decided to make a photographic record of every bird that comes into that tree. I've missed some, but this is what I have so far. We've got the orchard oriole female. There's a Baltimore oriole female. This is the orchard oriole female. This is a cedar waxwing, a catbird, a bluebird mommy, a bluebird baby, brown thrasher. Mockingbird came in to eat the berries, but found an insect instead. I'll always take the insect. This is a whirling vireo, a peewee, red-eyed vireo, robin, hungry kingbird, And this is a ruby crown kinglet that was not there to eat the berries, it's there to eat the insects, but I think that counts. Anyway, you know, a lot of people pay big bucks to go on birding trips. I just have to go to the bathroom. If you don't want to do your birding from the bathroom, go to the bedroom and look at the elderberry that's out of your bedroom window, and you'll get the same cast of characters when those berries are ripe. Which, I don't know, I find it entertaining. You can use the plants as a remote control to turn on nature. But each one of these plants we're putting in our biological recorder, unless they're conifers, makes leaves. And that brings me to the second thing we've got to think about with our biological recorders. Right now, when leaves fall, you know what we do. We get out our leaf blowers, we get out our rakes, we rake them all up, stuff them in garbage bags as if they were trash, and we put them out for the garbage man. Then we run to Home Depot, and we buy fertilizer, we buy mulch, we buy hoses so we can water. So we try to replace all the ecosystem services that these leaves give us for free. One thing we can't buy are the arthropods that live in those leaves. That's impossible to replace. Of course, the reason we're doing this is because what if one of those leaves blew onto our neighbor's yard? That would be bad news. But you know, you can anchor those leaves. Here's a guy, he's got a nice oak tree. He did not rake the leaves on the oak tree, and a beautiful fern garden came up. He did not plant any of those ferns, but he could have. And that anchors those leaves beautifully. There's no leaves blowing around there. What he's really done is create a wonderful sponge. When it rains, you have that huge thunderstorm, it soaks up everything. So you've got 0% runoff here. If you had a sun-baked lawn, there's 75% impermeability on that space. So you're saving a lot of water and recharging our aquifers, which is really important. But he's also, probably unknowingly, helped to save the wood thrush and other ground foraging birds. Wood thrushes forage in leaf litter for arthropods that are there. And one of the reasons they're disappearing is that we're removing leaf litter everywhere once we sterilize our spaces. Same thing with the ovenbird. It's called an ovenbird because it makes its nest out of leaves that look like little ovens on the ground. So no leaves, no ovenbirds. Kentucky warblers, hooded warblers. There's a lot of things that forage on the ground. But here's something that every bird needs to do, and that is make eggs. What are eggs made of? Calcium. Where do birds get their calcium? They do not drink milk. Well, recently we figured out that birds get their calcium from land snails. Most of their calcium is coming from tiny little land snails. Where are those land snails living? In the leaf litter. When we throw out our leaves, we're throwing out the ability of all the birds, even the ones that rarely come to the forest floor, throwing out their ability to get enough calcium to make their eggs. So the birds that are in the canopy all day long will come down to the forest floor, eat those snails the night before they're going to lay an egg, and turn it into eggshells. We can help those birds out by keeping the leaves around. So these days, nature is what we make of it. We can make a lot of it, or we can make a little bit of it, or none of it, by the way we landscape. And we're doing some studies to try to demonstrate how powerful this is as a conservation mechanism. Several years ago, I met a guy named Larry Wiener. I referred to one of his landscapes earlier, who's been doing this for 20 years. He's been landscaping largely or exclusively with native plants in many areas of the East. This is one of his landscapes. And when I met Larry, I immediately thought of an opportunity to actually test some of the things that I've been talking about. So here's an opportunity to go on these people's properties and measure the biodiversity and see how that compares to nearby properties that are traditionally landscaped. So, of course, after I have an idea, I give it to a student so that I don't have to do it. And the student in this case was Karen Burkhardt. Even though she doesn't look happy, she was happy. She did a great job. What she did was compare 6 Larry Wiener properties, native properties, with 6 traditional properties that were the same size, same house footprint, and the same amount of plant biomass. She was not comparing bare lawn with a forest. They all had the same amount of plant biomass on these properties. The only thing that differed was the percentage of native plants. And she measured caterpillars and breeding birds. She found significantly more caterpillars on the native sites and significantly more caterpillar species on the native sites. And as the percentage of non-native plants increased, so you got around 80%, the abundance of caterpillars went right down to 0. So around 80% alien property, she couldn't find any caterpillars at all. Which means you really can create a lifeless yard if that is your goal. birds. There were significantly more birds on the native property, significantly more species of birds. When we took out the birds that are really man birds, the starlings, the house finches, house sparrows, from the data set, and only looked at the birds of conservation concern in the area where we did this study, we got the biggest difference of all. So the birds that needed the help the most responded the most to the native plantings, which is really encouraging to me, because it suggests to me that, that this can immediately address these species that are in the most trouble. Another thing that's really encouraging to me is that the properties we looked at, notice I say we, properties we looked at were young. The Larry Weiner landscapes had only been landscaped within the last 3 years when we did this study, which means all the effects that Karen measured happened really quickly. And that's great, because we are a society of instant gratification. And if it took 50 years for these changes to materialize on your properties, nobody would bother doing it. Okay, the last thing we need to focus on is what people worry about most. If you attract all of these insects to your yard with native plants, they're going to eat your native plants, and your plants will be defoliated or full of holes, and that's even worse than having your leaves blow on your neighbor's yard. So what are we going to do about that? Well, that's not what I'm promoting. What I'm promoting is to build a balanced ecological community, the one that used to be there on your property. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. This is a tobacco hornworm. It's a type of sphinx moth. It was eating one of our tomato plants, and I went out to take its picture and saw that it's covered with these white cocoons. There are becconid wasps, little parasitic wasps in each one of those cocoons that have already tunneled out the inside of this guy's body. So he's alive, but he's dead. He's not going to be eating more tomato plant. He's not going to mature. Not going to make more tobacco hornworms. This is a pterodactyl wasp, which is laying eggs in the becconid cocoons. So it's another type of natural enemy, which is making sure that we don't have too many beconids at our house. The beconids making sure that we don't have too many tobacco hornworms at our house. And the tobacco hornworms making sure we don't have too many tomatoes. A lot of people say, how come you have these natural enemies controlling your tobacco hornworms when we don't? That's a good question. I've thought about that. One possibility is that we've got so many tobacco hornworms that they're there all the time, and these natural enemies can be there eating tobacco hornworms all the time. But that's not the case. I took this picture, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. It's the only one we've seen on our property in the 10 years we've been there until this year. I saw another one this year. But you know, that's 2, and this guy's dead. So that's not enough to keep all these guys around. The reason we've got these natural enemies and many other types of natural enemies is we have 10 species of sphinx moths at our house that I've found so far. None of the others are eating our tomato plants, so we don't even notice them. One of the species is Pandora sphinx. The reason we have Pandora sphinx is because we've got its host plant, Virginia creeper. That's Virginia creeper that I planted on our back porch. I did it specifically so that I could look for the caterpillar of the Pandora sphinx because it's beautiful and I wanted to take its picture. And it came. So it comes in that color, whatever that is. Also comes in yellow, also comes in green, and it also comes covered with these becconid cocoons. It's a pretty good sized caterpillar. People say, aren't you afraid it's going to eat all your Virginia creeper? No. Virginia creeper grows really fast. And in 10 years, we've only seen these 3. Why is everything so rare at our house? Because look at all the things that are killing them. It's really difficult to reach maturity at my house. We also have other types of predators. This is an assassin bug, a cottonwood bug. It's eating a fall webworm. The fall webworms are doing their thing right now. This guy's eating as many of them as he can all summer long. And then you've got the breeding birds. A pair of bluebirds. This is true for all of these little guys. A pair of bluebirds will bring back up to 300 caterpillars a day when they're feeding their young. I go out looking for these caterpillars, and I can't find them because they've already found them. So breeding birds are an excellent source of pest control on your yards. But we like to measure things. So we've gone back to the Larry Weiner comparisons that we looked at earlier and looked at the native properties and the traditional properties, looking at damage caused by sucking insects and damage caused by chewing insects. This is the percentage of leaves that had damage. And as you can see here, 1.5% had sucking damage. These are error bars, standard error bars, so there's no statistical difference between the damage, sucking damage on native properties versus traditional properties. Same with chewing damage by chewing insects, 4 or 5% of the leaves Again, no difference between the native properties and the traditional properties. It looks like the native properties actually have a little bit less damage, but there's no significant difference. This is the 10% damage level. Other studies have shown that homeowners don't even notice damage until that 10% of the leaves are damaged. So both of these types of damage are well below what we call the aesthetic injury level. They would escape detection for entirely different reasons. We have very little damage on the native properties because there's a whole complex of natural enemies there controlling all those species that are there trying to eat the plants. There's very little damage on the traditional properties because there's very little life there, period. And that's why I can look across to my other neighbor's house where there's a woodlot that he's not doing anything with. He's not taking care of it. So he's not there spraying or doing anything. You've got a natural food web working very well. They're largely native plants, and they are not defoliated. So this is a grassroots approach to conservation that I've been excited about for a while. For exactly that reason. It's something that we can all do with very little investment. We don't need to get the government involved. We don't need to get permission from anybody, which is really good because the government's really busy these days. We don't need to send our money to Brazil anymore to have conservation happen, which is also good because Brazil's been taking our money and cutting down forests faster than ever. All we need to do is start increasing the percentage of native plants in our yard and then watch it happen in front of us. Watch it happen right away. There's very few environmental issues where you can do something and see the results, get positive feedback right away. So this is one of the really encouraging things about this approach. If you're interested in getting nature into the lives of your kids, there's no better way to do that than to put it right where they're living. This little girl is 4 years old, and the reason she can play in this meadow is because it's 15 feet from her back porch. You didn't have to take a class trip to go see it. The reason she wants to play in this meadow is because there's something interesting to see. If that was mowed, she wouldn't be out there. She'd be learning how to plug something in her ears. So somebody once said that gardening is a way of showing you believe in tomorrow. And I think that's never been more true than right now. Because the way we garden, the way we landscape today is going to determine what life looks like tomorrow. That's a really awesome responsibility that homeowners and gardeners and landscape architects and designers have never had before. But the more I go around and talk to people, the more I think we're up to this challenge. Thank you very much.
Doug has volunteered to take a few questions. Before that happens, given that some of you may escape, I want to get my message in here as well, which is to realize that programs like this are brought to you by the Carey Institute, and we, of course, would love to have you join our group of supporters of the Institute and of the programs we can bring you. I'd love to have you all join the Aldo Leopold Society, which is our most significant group of supporters. But do think about joining our family and helping with the endeavor to bring you good public programs here on a regular basis on the science and on the status of our natural world. That's my message. Now, welcome, Doug. Take a few questions.
Okay, I know the question you have first is, actually, let's go back to that. If you didn't finish memorizing that list, you can find it at that website. So that was a list of woody plants. There's also a total list of all of the herbaceous or non-woody plants in the Mid-Atlantic state, all ranked by their value. This is Catherine Zimmerman, who just wrote a book about creating a meadow. It's just out this year. So if you're interested in starting by creating a meadow, which I'll have to say is not the easiest way to start. Meadows are tough, but she goes through it step by step and tells you what the pitfalls are and how to avoid them. So I recommend that. Okay, now
let's have a couple of questions, and then you'll want to meet up with Doug as he signs books in the lobby 1 year.
Who's going to do all the meeting?
Okay, that's a good question, but I suggest as we take more area out of lawn, that the lawn care industry become a landscape industry and take care of all the property that needs to be managed. You can't just let nature take its course because you're going to end up with Cape May or Fairhill with all these exotic species. It takes a lot of labor, and That's because we've got 3,400 species of invasive plants now. So I say there's already people doing this. Let's just have them do it in a different way.
Do you think the government should in any way regulate the sale of invasive, non-native plants?
You mean you don't think selling them over here and then spending billions to pull them out over here makes sense? No. Well, the climate in this country today is not real favorable towards government regulation of anything. So I'm trying to approach it from a logical perspective, a bottoms-up approach. People